Hello! In this video, I will be covering my process for this illustration that I did for Lunar New Year 2025 with the theme of Year of the Snake. I'll also talk about how I get away with not doing line art as an artist who loves the look but dislikes doing the line work. I first start out with some idea sketches. These are really rough, focusing on the placement of shapes and overall compositions. The goal here isn't to focus on any of the details, but to just get the brain juices going and find an idea that I am excited about drawing. I like the sassiness of the first idea here, so I cleaned up that sketch a little bit more. Again, no details, but just visually thinking through things like her pose or her outfit. I then add color to these sketches and quickly look at different color combinations. I ultimately chose the red car because that is an auspicious color for the Lunar New Year, with yellow accents because that seems like a snaky color. I also add in some very rough shading at this point because it's a really good way to sketch out some of the volume. I then move into the rough draft state. I sketch out the character again, but this time just a little bit cleaner so that it makes my life easier in the rendering stage later. For example, I finalize what I want her hairstyle to be, so in this case a long hime cut, what accessories I want, like her necklaces and rings, and work out her outfit in a little bit more detail, for example her boots or some buckles on her pants. I also try to clean up the anatomy here as much as possible. By making sure these are pretty set at this point, once I get to more of the cleanup or rendering phase, there's very little brain work that I have to do, so it makes it very easy to stay focused. I also corrected the perspective and overall shape of the car to match the positioning of the girl. Now that most of the overall shapes and colors are in place, I start adding adjustments to the light and color of the image to finalize the vibes. For example, when I look at the values of this rough draft, I find that the girl doesn't stand out very much from the car with her black hair on a red car. To fix this, I added some ambient lighting in a gradient behind the girl to make it lighter, which would cause the girl's black hair to stand out and create a sense of depth between her head and the tail end of the car. Once I'm a little bit more satisfied with the car, I went back to fix the base color shapes of the girl based off the rough draft lines I put down earlier. Even though it looks like I'm just redrawing things over and over again in the rough stages, I do so because it's actually faster to adjust the shapes at this stage than if I wait until the rendering stage to start fixing things. Now, up until this point, my draft has been done in Procreate on my iPad, but here I move the file over to Krita, which is my art program of choice on my PC. For this drawing, I start redrawing the base shapes on new separate layers based on the rough draft. Do you see how the shapes I draw seem to have a black border around them? I actually utilize the layer style capability in order to save myself from line art. This is a tool that you can toggle on a layer to automatically have a border at the edge of whatever shape you are drawing for that layer. This is what it looks like in Krita, and in Clip Studio, it's in the layer properties. This is extra useful for drawing strands of hair or sections of fur, where the outline can become really detailed and time-consuming to do by hand. This method also makes it very easy to fix parts of your drawing, since instead of having to redraw the line art and fix the base color, you can just fix the base color and the border will move automatically. This lowers my barrier to corrections, meaning I can spend more time making more fixes until I'm satisfied. Of course, there are some major disadvantages to this method. The biggest issue is that it does remove all character from your line art. There is no line width or opacity variation, and you cannot color different regions of the border differently without having to move to a new layer altogether. Depending on the illustration, these issues might be a deal breaker, but for this particular drawing, I thought the bold lines would suit it just fine. Also, this method will not create any lines within a particular shape, so you do still have to add any line art on the inside of the border that you would like, but in my opinion, that is in general much easier than the line art defining the shapes on the outside, so I usually just add that in the rendering stage. Once I am satisfied with the base colors and shapes, I go in and fix my light and shadow. My shadows are usually done on a multiply layer, and I add diffuse or environmental lighting on a soft light layer. I generally like to start by keeping these shapes sharp to clearly define areas of light versus shadow by thinking of the illustration like a low poly 3D model with very rough planes. I then go back into the areas that are round to soften those edges out. I find this two-step method prevents the shadows from getting too small and complicated, as that does reduce its volumizing effect. Now, the drawing still looks a little like Flash animation shapes or something, so we start adding more details on the inside of the shapes. I start by adding overall gradients to the flat shapes to give it a bit more volume and oomph. This includes some rings in the hair, color in the cheeks or fingertips, and overall top to bottom gradients in her clothes. At this point, we are solidly in the rendering stage, and I start painting over the existing shapes, adding lines or details as I see fit. This is the step at which I add quote-unquote line art inside of the border shapes if I want to. The more detail you add inside of the shapes, the more we move away from that Flash animation blob type look and more towards an actual illustration. From here, I clean up the vehicle. I do really like machines and vehicles, but I'm still trying to learn how to draw them. My learning from this illustration is that shiny things look more accurate when the highlights and shadows are done more with a hard edge. Using too much soft edges makes your surface texture look more matte. After the illustration is mostly done, I went on to add design elements to make this look like an actual magazine cover. And that is it for this illustration. I hope I was able to share something new with you in this process video and that you found it useful. Let's have fun drawing!